Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Garrett Smith, the nutrition detective of nutritionrestored.com and the Vitamin A Toxicity and Detoxification Network. I'm trying a little new format here for this presentation because I want everyone to be able to see these slides that I'm going to go over and see the numbers and the quotes. So what are we going over today? We are going over the fact, the indisputable fact, that chronic vitamin A toxicity is a modern epidemic and the undeniable research that shows this to be true. So here we go. This is an epidemic that we were warned about, and it is now here. The presentation we're going to go over today is going to cover those warnings from 80 years ago, how the liver biopsy is the gold standard test for vitamin A toxicity of all types. And I'm going to focus heavily on studies of that for this very reason. We're going to go over evidence from multiple countries over multiple decades, all showing the same thing, basically. And in the future, I'm going to be doing a longer video covering even more evidence of vitamin A toxicity and why you want to be concerned about it. But today I just wanted to get through this shorter one so we could move forward. So these past warnings of what was coming. The first warning about future vitamin A toxicity was from a paper called Hypervitaminosis A in 1948. That's a while ago, right? Everybody thinks this is a modern thing and it's all supplement driven, and it's not. Quote, "The current popularity of vitamins, widely advertised and consumed in great quantity the country over, directs the attention of physicians to the question of their misuse. The report of additional cases of hypervitaminosis A may result in either a reduction of the strength of this vitamin in commercial preparations or the use of a label warning against the dangers of overdosage. Still other measures may be desirable. To paraphrase a comment made by Joseph, one safeguard we lack is the protection of the public against the evangelic zeal of persons who have been sold on vitamins." Let's go to the next one. The second warning about the future vitamin A toxicity that was coming. A paper called Masked Hypervitaminosis A and Liver Injury from 1982. So this is still a while ago, right? Quote, "With rampant food faddism, the medical indications for treating acne vulgaris with vitamin A, and the recent push given to the still controversial preventive role of retinoids in carcinogenesis, we may be on the verge of an epidemic of vitamin A toxicity." End quote. Note how they included rampant food faddism, like eat the rainbow, okay? Food vitamin A is exactly the same as supplemental vitamin A. I've covered this in other videos here. The research shows it. There is no difference between the vitamin A that is in food and the vitamin A that is in supplements or medications. The only difference is what form it's actually in, whether that's beta carotene or retinol or retinaldehyde or retinoic acid or retinol esters. The form is the only thing that changes. The way it's processed by the body doesn't change one bit. They knew this back in 82. Food faddism causing problems. Okay, moving on. We're going to go into the gold standard of vitamin A toxicity testing, and then we'll cover pretty much everything else. So what is that gold standard of vitamin A toxicity testing? The gold standard test is liver biopsy and only liver biopsy. Do we know this for sure? Yes, in the literature it says in multiple places. From a paper assessing vitamin A status, past, present, and future. Quote, "Direct measurement of liver reserves of vitamin A status, the gold standard through biopsy, will never be a field-friendly indicator and therefore has limited utility in the real world." End quote. We'll get to that last part there too, but it is the gold standard. That's the thing I want you to see. Another paper, a survey of human liver reserves of retinol in London. I think this was in the 70s, this paper. Quote, "It is generally accepted that the most direct and accurate method of assessing vitamin A status is to measure the concentration of the vitamin in the liver, since it is in this organ that 90% or more of the body's reserves are located. However, and particularly from the viewpoint of field surveys, The tissue in question is usually inaccessible in living persons because, for ethical reasons, liver biopsies can be performed in only a limited number of clinical situations. Do you get why it's not? They say it has limited utility in the real world because of ethical problems. They can't go and take liver biopsies from people just because they're sick. They have to have a reason to. And so, you know, with research boards and IRBs and stuff like that, they can't do liver biopsies all the time on everybody. That's why. It's not because it's not useful. It is the most useful test. It's just ethics-wise, it's tough to get at many samples. So here we go. What is a liver biopsy? Surgeon takes a chunk of your liver. There's a picture here. Big needle. They do it while you're alive, especially if you had a bunch of liver problems. They might go and do a liver biopsy while you're still alive, but you have to have liver problems for them to want to do that to you. Or in these studies, they did it after an autopsy, necropsy, some people call it, but on cadavers, dead people. So they are liver samples taken from dead people during an autopsy, okay? After they get the sample, they analyze it for vitamin A compounds chemically. I personally don't want this done on me. It's not a pleasant process. It does hurt a lot. And you probably don't either want it done to you. So we have the limited utility. I don't want it done. You don't want it done. Nobody wants it done. Nobody wants to sign up for this study just to check a bunch of living people for their vitamin A in their liver. So nobody uses it, okay? Moving on. Why don't we just use blood tests for vitamin A toxicity? Isn't that easy, Dr. Smith? Well, let's go into the reality of that, because some of you may watch this video and say, I want to go to my doctor and test for blood vitamin A, because that's the same, right? No. From the paper, role of fat-soluble vitamins A and D in the pathogenesis of influenza, a new perspective. Quote, serum retinol concentrations, normally 1 to 3 micromoles per liter, do not reflect hepatic vitamin A concentrations over a wide range of liver values. Since the secreted retinol binding protein is under homeostatic control. Thus, serum retinol concentrations vary little despite major alterations in vitamin A intake. Case reports of hypervitaminosis A often show serum retinol concentrations within normal limits, indicating that serum retinol is not a valid measure of vitamin A status during toxicity. End quote. Why do we not use blood tests for vitamin A toxicity assessment? Because blood tests suck for this. That's why. Serum retinol is blood vitamin A. That's what your doctor would likely order if you ask them to run a blood vitamin A test on you. If they run a serum retinol binding protein, they really don't know what they're doing. And if they run a beta carotene on you, a serum beta carotene, they also don't know what they're doing. And if they run a retinol palmitate level on you, that's a rare test you can get at one lab in this country. There's no research on retinol palmitate by itself. In the research, they do retinol esters. The only good test that you could go out and get is a serum retinol. And it's not good at showing if you have toxicity or not, unless you have a doctor who knows what they're looking at, and that's kind of my specialty. So, moving on. Some important notes on the following studies. They used liver biopsies, chunk of your liver, chunk of the liver, done during autopsy or necropsy with the bodies or cadavers of people, okay? They passed away due to accidental causes or chronic disease or chronic disease. It's not just sick people. These are people who died sometimes in the prime of their life from like an auto accident, and they had submitted their body to science and they got the liver biopsy, okay? The modern accepted standard of vitamin A toxicity in liver tissue is more than 1 micromole of vitamin A per gram of liver tissue. I wrote it on these papers. I didn't know how to do the fancy U, so it's 1 umole per gram or micromole per gram, AKA a micromole per gram. Same thing. It's just different ways of writing it. Some studies use different units in the way they described it. We can convert between these units. So we converted the toxicity levels of the other units for this, and I note these on the different slides of what the actual toxicity is of the unit we're talking about. So greater than 952 international units or IUs of vitamin A per gram of liver, or more than 286 milligrams of vitamin A per kilogram of liver. So just so you know, the milligrams per kilograms and the there's milligrams per kilogram, there's international unit, IU per gram, and there's micromoles per gram. Those are the three different ones. Then, in the different studies, they weren't as exact as we would have liked, but they weren't even talking about vitamin A toxicity back in these studies in terms of the liver. They didn't know what it was yet. They hadn't established it. We are looking for typically liver vitamin A levels being above 1 micromole per gram, the modern standard in that unit, or above 1,000 international units IU per gram. So we're going even higher than the 952, or above 300 milligrams per kilogram, which is again, even above the 286 milligrams per kilogram. That is the standard. We have some exceptions in the data because the data is not as complete as we would like. And you'll see where that is, and I note that. So we're gonna go over the two most recent studies first. First, vitamin A toxicity in the United States in a paper from 2018. So this is pretty recent, pretty legit for our concerns, right? The paper is called Serum Retinol Esters are positively correlated with analyzed total liver vitamin A reserves collected from US adults at time of death. Let's go over the quotes from this paper and then we'll come back around to them. Quote, cadaver liver samples were analyzed to explore vitamin A status biomarker associations in US adults. 9 subjects, 33% had hypervitaminosis A, greater than or equal to 1.0 micromole of vitamin A per gram of liver. The World Health Organization often uses a 20% prevalence to define a severe public health concern. Chronic vitamin A toxicity can occur from ingestion of moderate levels of preformed vitamin A for months or years. The hypervitaminotic A concentrations discovered in these subjects would not have been identified by currently applied serum indicators. So, that's the end quote. Let me head into this. 9 of the 27 subjects had vitamin A toxicity. 33% of their US adult samples. 1 in every 3 people. Do you see a lot of sickness out there in Americans? I did a whole video on obesity related to vitamin A. There's 1/3 guaranteed vitamin A toxic Americans based on liver studies, okay? There's a lot of obese and overweight Americans, aren't there? You can go look at my other video about all the connections there in the research between the two. Next, the World Health Organization says that a 20%, if something's happening at 20% across the board, across the population, it is a severe public health concern. This line was put into this paper on purpose to note that this is a big problem. This is the big thing for folks who think that they're just going to eat all the food vitamin A that they want, and it's not ever going to be a problem because it's from food, which is an appeal to nature fallacy and is totally wrong. They're saying here chronic vitamin A toxicity can occur from ingestion of moderate, not high, moderate levels of vitamin A for months or years. Months or years. Most people watching this, how many years have you been alive? Probably a couple. You've probably been alive a lot of months. So then what if we start saying, well, lower levels of, even minor levels of vitamin A for decades? So if moderate levels for months or years could cause problems, what about decades of lower intakes? Could that cause toxicity? If you do the math, yeah, absolutely. 33% of the adults are vitamin A toxic? Okay. This last one is the best one. The vitamin A toxicity, I'm translating here, the vitamin A toxicity would not have been shown by blood tests. They were vitamin A toxic in their liver, and it didn't show in their blood tests, and it would not have shown in their blood tests. Okay. They did blood tests on, they didn't do blood tests on them, or maybe they did. I don't remember this study, but they're saying they would not have found it, probably because they did blood tests. Sorry, I forgot that part about that paper. Now, the most recent paper, they haven't been doing these studies much in recent years. I wonder why. So we have a vitamin A toxicity in Singapore, different ethnic groups in Singapore. The title of the paper is The Vitamin A Reserve of Liver in Health and Coronary Heart Disease Among Ethnic Groups in Singapore. Again, 1988. So it's still, we're talking 32 years ago. These are the percentages of people above 300 milligrams per kilogram, whereas toxicity starts at 286. Chinese Singaporeans, 19.1%. Indian Singaporeans, 13.6%. Malay Singaporeans, 24%. Caucasian and Eurasian Singaporeans, 40%. So basically, the white people living in Singapore in 1988, based upon the cadavers that they were able to get, 40% of them were vitamin A toxic. Remember, epidemic prevalence starts at 20%. The Chinese living in Singapore were at 19.1. So they're right on the border. The Malaysian folks in Singapore, 24%. The white folks living in Singapore, whether they came, wherever they came from, 40%. Now here's some more additions, quotes from the paper. Quote, at the extreme end of the range, 9% of the subjects had concentrations above 500 milligrams per kilogram, and 1% of the subjects had concentrations above 1,000 milligrams per kilogram in the liver. 10% of all the subjects were almost 2 times as high as the toxicity level. Remember, 286 is the toxicity level. 9% of them were at 500 or above, and 1% of them were above 1,000. That's a lot. Another quote, the ethnic distribution of vitamin A reserve in coronary deaths was similar to that in accident victims. There was no significant difference between the sexes in hepatic vitamin A reserve. So no difference in sexes in terms of the vitamin A reserve in their liver. Heart disease was the same as accidents. Accidents are accidental. Coronary heart disease, chronic health. What they're saying is there's not much of it. It's across the board in people. Are you seeing that? Well, that's what that means. Let's go to the next one. We're going to go over more vitamin A toxicity studies. These are going to be in chronological order. So I'm going to start with the oldest first and then move back up to the last one we had before that Singapore study. This is a good one. Vitamin A toxicity in New Zealand in 1951 and 1960 to 61. That's when they got the bodies. Okay. The paper came out 61 or 62, but they got the bodies in 51 and 60 and 61. The paper is called Vitamin A Content of Human Liver from Autopsies in New Zealand. 27.9 or 31 out of 1,100 subjects were above 900 IUs per gram. Toxicity starts at 952 IUs per gram, but this is the best information that the data gave me, right? So 28% of people were above 900 units per gram, really close to toxicity level. A quote from the paper, children from 1 to 10 years had markedly higher liver stores with a median value of 1,982 units per gram than other groups. I want to explain something about what the median means. The median would be like if you had 5 people, five numbers, 5 subjects, and they all had a different number, and there was a 1 on this side and there was a 10 on this side, and you have other people might be a 2 or a 7. The median is the middle number. It would be that middle one person with 2 on each side of them. It would be the median is the middle number, if you want to think of it that way. If you arrange them all in order, The median's the middle number. The mean is the average. The median is the middle number. So what that means by definition, if the median child between 1 to 10 years old was at 1,982, which is more than twice the toxicity level, that means half of the other kids from 1 to 10 years old were above that. We're at that or above. Do you see how toxic these kids are? Do we have problems with health issues in young children these days? Part of it's because their livers are so small and they don't have as much room to store it. And so they get toxic much, much, much quicker. Especially if people are trying to feed them health foods like eat the rainbow and take your cod liver oil and eat your liver and drink your milk and all that stuff. But we'll get to that because the authors mentioned this. Remember, this is back in the 50s and 60s. Another quote, the exceptionally high value for a young adult of 10,438 IUs per gram associated with an unusually high daily prescription of vitamin A, end quote. The toxicity level is 952 IUs per gram. This young adult was at 10,438. So you can see how fast supplements can take you up. So if you've ever taken supplements of vitamin A, multivitamins too, fortified foods, which is a supplement, look at how crazy the vitamin A toxicity can get. Another quote, in 39 children dying under 10 years of age were some unusually high values. Example, 4,720 and 6,878 IUs per gram, end quote. 39 children dying early, under 10 years of age, being 5 times and 7 times higher than the toxicity level. Now, how could this happen? Are they all supplementing too much? Are they taking synthetic vitamin A? They've got to be to get those numbers, right? It's got to be synthetic. It couldn't be natural vitamin A, could it? Well, there's a quote in the paper specifically covering that. Quote, the findings are ascribed to a liberal intake of butter, a dietary with ample vitamin A and carotene, and the wide use of medicinal preparations containing or made from fish liver oils, particularly for infants and children, end quote. Note that synthetic vitamin A was not mentioned in that list. Butter, and when they say a dietary, they mean a diet. Their diet, what they ate is their dietary. Ample vitamin A and carotene, so they're saying foods with plenty of vitamin A and carotenoids. For all you people who think you can't get vitamin A toxic on carotenoids, you are terribly wrong. Terribly wrong. Just because they say it over and over in the science doesn't mean it's true. I have papers that show that not only are carotenoids toxic to your mitochondria and they can cause vitamin A toxicity, but they'll change your skin color. They'll make you more sensitive to the sun. They will, oh, they're also addictive. Don't you wonder why so many people will keep juicing all those carrots day after day? And then they'll tell you about all their new health problems, but yet they'll keep juicing those carrots. You ever see people smoke cigarettes? Doesn't it sound like the same thing? Keep smoking, get more health problems, keep smoking. I have a paper that showed that smoking cigarettes, people who had smoked cigarettes and then tried to quit carotenoid foods said that some of them actually said that quitting the carotenoid foods was harder than quitting the cigarettes. It's out there. Absolutely. Not making this stuff up. I don't make any of this stuff up. So, New Zealand, 1950s and 60s. 28% of the people were vitamin A toxic in this study. And it was from foods and food-based vitamin A. Don't doubt it. Now, vitamin A toxicity in Ghana in 1963 and 1967, we have 2 papers. Certain people say that Africa has horrible vitamin A deficiency, right? They're all so vitamin A deficient. We got to send in Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation. We got to give them lots of vitamin A and we got to grow special biofortified, genetically modified crops that have extra vitamin A so we can all save them. This is 50 years ago. Let's see. Hyperkeratonemia in Ghanaians. I hope I'm saying that right. Ghanaians. Quote, the vitamin A content of the 49 livers varied considerably from 32 micrograms per gram to 3,635 micrograms per gram. 24 of the livers showed vitamin A levels above 300 micrograms per gram, while the average concentration for the whole group was 409 micrograms per gram. I'm just going to remind you that toxicity is above 286 micrograms per gram. So they had 49 people. 24 of them were above 300. They were toxic. That's half of the subjects, 49%. Okay? That's one paper. Now we have the paper, Distribution of Carotene and Vitamin A in Liver, Pancreas, and Body Fat of Ghanaians. This I just had to pull from the data. In 17 subjects, the median value was 350 micrograms per gram, with 12% of the people over 900 micrograms per gram. So, again, in this paper, it was actually more than, so the median's the middle person, 350. So that means half the people, by definition, are above that. The middle person was 350, half the people, they split the number of people in half. It's the middle person, so that means half of the people were above 350, and the toxicity starts at 286. Again, 12% of them were 3 times as high as the toxicity level at over 900 micrograms per gram. It would seem that Ghana has a vitamin A toxicity problem, not a deficiency problem. Is Africa really deficient in vitamin A as we are made to believe? I'm going to say no. Vitamin A toxicity in Canada in 1969, eh? The paper is called Vitamin A Reserves of Canadians. They had 451 subjects. That's a lot. And the percentages I'm going to give you are over 240 micrograms per gram. And I'm going to give them in relationship to the province that they got the people from. Now, toxicity is above 286 micrograms per gram, but this is the highest they gave the data in the study. So I can't figure it out any more than this. We just know that this is the percentage of people above 240, where toxicity starts at 286. Halifax, 7.1%, Montreal, 7.3%, Ottawa, 4.9%, Winnipeg was up at 12.1%, and Vancouver was at 21.9%, which is above the World Health Organization's 20%. Here's a quote. Children between 1 and 10 years of age had the highest vitamin A stores of everybody. Children between 1 and 10 years of age had the highest vitamin A stores. Maybe you're a mom or a dad out there and you thought you were helping your kids by supplementing them with carotenoids and cod liver oil and vitamin A and trying to have them eat the rainbow. You got to eat your butter, and you got to eat your dairy, and you got to do all this stuff. And maybe your kids' health tanked instead of getting better. Maybe you caused them a vitamin A toxicity problem. And maybe you want to look into that. Just to go back on those kids, the average of the kids in that study, the average was 304. So the average was toxic above 286. The median, which is that middle kid, that means half of them are above this, was 247.6. So half the kids were above 247, getting close to that 286. That's toxicity level. Now, vitamin A toxicity in New York City in 1970. The title, liver stores of vitamin A in a normal population dying suddenly or rapidly from unnatural causes in New York City. When they say unnatural causes, I mean, they mentioned stabbings, they mentioned, well, I think they mentioned a heroin overdose in here. Like, these are unnatural causes, so they're not saying chronic disease, they're saying accidents. So, 1970, 10 out of 101, or 10% of the livers tested were above 300 micrograms per gram. Why did they keep doing 300 micrograms per gram? That was their level in there, because they thought that normal vitamin A, the high end of it was 300 micrograms per gram, which is great because later researchers figured out that 286 was the toxicity level. So 300 and 286, they're nice and close. Here's a quote. One specimen from a 31-year-old white female had a very high concentration of vitamin A, 1,000 micrograms per gram of tissue. Again, 3 times as high as the toxic range. More than 3 times as high, almost 4. Moving on. Vitamin A toxicity in Washington, D.C. in 1973. The paper is called Vitamin A and Carotene Levels of a Selected Population of Metropolitan Washington, D.C. Remember that toxicity level is above 286 micrograms per gram. The number is the percent regardless of race, sex, or cause of death. 24.2%, or 80 out of 329 subjects, were above 300 micrograms per gram. Divided up by race and sex, the percentage is above 300 micrograms per gram. So we're just splitting it out more. White males, 30% toxic. Black males, 15% toxic. White females, 27.5% toxic. Black females, 29.2% toxic. I hope I don't sneeze. Vitamin A toxicity in London, England in 1977 to 1978. This is the last study I have until we hit those more recent ones. Title, A Survey of Human Liver Reserves of Retinol in London. 112 out of 364, or 31% of the subjects, were over 300 micrograms per gram. Again, remember, toxicity starts at 286 micrograms per gram. Here's a quote. 40 subjects, or 11% of the survey population, had reserves above 500 milligrams per kilogram, and 3 of these individuals had reserves in excess of 1,000 milligrams per kilogram. So again, 11% are double the just a little bit less than double the toxicity level. 11%, 1 out of every 9 people. And 3 of these people, so 3 out of 364 is like, it's 1%, had reserves in excess of 1,000 milligrams per kilogram. That's 3 times above the high end of the level. So we went through all these. You notice how we have those ones in Singapore. So we have this one in the 70s, late 70s, 1/3 of people toxic in vitamin A. We go to that Singapore study, 1988. We have Caucasian and Eurasian people living in Singapore are at 40%. Malaysians living in Singapore are at 24%. The Chinese living in Singapore were at 19.1%. As we're getting, especially in the Western countries, as we're getting into the later years, it's going up. It's not going down, it's going up. Important thing to note. One more paper. How much vitamin A toxicity is happening worldwide? These are 3 different studies. The paper is called Overlapping Vitamin A Interventions in the US, Guatemala, Zambia, and South Africa Case Studies. This first one is a repeat of the one we already went over. Liver biopsy, the gold standard test from 27 US adult cadavers, revealed a 33% prevalence of hypervitaminosis A. That is the definition of an epidemic at 1 out of every 3 people. Zambia, in 133 Zambian children, 59% were diagnosed with hypervitaminosis A, and 16% had more than 5% total serum vitamin A as retinol esters. This is another marker of vitamin A toxicity that can be done by blood tests, but nobody does it. Weird. It's like they don't do these liver studies, and they don't do these nobody can get retinol esters tested. It's almost like they don't want you to find out your vitamin A toxicity. So in Zambia, 6 out of 10 kids are vitamin A toxic. In 40 South African children who frequently consumed liver, there's that food-based vitamin A again, 72.5 had more than 5% total serum vitamin A as retinol esters. That's 7 out of 10 kids. And the retinol ester test is legit, but nobody runs it, except in research studies. This is important to note. All 3 of those countries encourage high carotenoid consumption, eat a rainbow, have mandatory fortified foods. Here in the US, we got dairy, right? In South and Central America, they fortify sugar. I just saw in Nigeria, they're fortifying flour. There's biofortified foods, it's everywhere. And these countries also have a high percentage of supplement users or targeted supplementation to preschool children. High percent of supplement users. Can you say the US? Doesn't matter if you're supplementing it natural or synthetic. It doesn't matter. The research says there's no difference. No one says there's any difference in the research about the forms of vitamin A. The only people that do that are the bloggers on the internet trying to sell their stuff. There's no evidence of them being any different. So now, I wanted to add this last bit to the presentation, the general effect of vitamin A in well-nourished people. If you're watching this YouTube, you are probably a well-nourished person. You're not starving, okay? What happens when vitamin A is given to well-nourished people? The paper is called The Neurotoxic Effects of Vitamin A and Retinoids, and was written in 2015. Here's the quote. Nonetheless, it has been demonstrated that vitamin A intake among well-nourished subjects may lead to decreased life quality and increased mortality rates. End quote. Note there are 4 references there. They're not basing that on one reference. They're basing that statement on 4 references. The translation of that means in well-fed people, vitamin A intake, which means any vitamin A. Note they didn't say high vitamin A intake. They didn't say moderate vitamin A intake. They didn't say low vitamin A intake. They said vitamin A intake. Vitamin A intake in well-fed people equals a lower quality of life and earlier death. I'm going through the research here. I'm not making this stuff up, folks. So now that you know all about the epidemic of vitamin A toxicity that is worldwide right now, and just remember through this coronavirus thing that many people are out there pushing mega doses of vitamin A, how's that going to end up well? It's not. It's going to get worse unless people start realizing that this is not a vitamin, it is only a poison. Moving on. In summary, we were warned of the epidemic of vitamin A toxicity. We were warned it was coming. Gold standard liver biopsy testing shows us that this epidemic is here right now. These epidemic toxicity levels have been shown in multiple countries over multiple decades. Blood tests will not show you if you are toxic or not with vitamin A in your actual liver, which is where 90% of it sits. Food causes vitamin A toxicity just as well as synthetic vitamin A. Make sure to see that, review that New Zealand study for that, and I have other references I'll go over in my other presentation. And if you have any chronic health issues, anything you're dealing with, you are extremely likely to be dealing with some level of chronic vitamin A toxicity. This includes the big ones like heart disease, cancer, and autoimmunity, but it also includes thyroid. It includes, I'm tired. It includes, I don't sleep well. I've got insomnia issues. It includes all of these things. We see all this stuff improve, just general skin problems. So if this vitamin A toxicity epidemic, you don't have to, think of it this as a spectrum. When you're getting up into cancer, autoimmunity, heart disease, these are really, really, really toxic. But if you were only mildly toxic, that might be, I've got some thyroid problems. I'm tired. I get super stiff after my workouts. I don't know why. All these things we can relate to vitamin A toxicity. Okay? If you want help with it, we're going to get into that. So how do we fix this problem? I'm going to give you a quick overview. First, you need to eat organic and drink properly filtered water to avoid glyphosate. Glyphosate stops and the cytochrome enzymes in your liver from turning bad retinoic acids into less bad retinoic acids. It causes glyphosate causes vitamin A problems. That's kind of everywhere now, isn't it? Then you want to reduce all of your exposures to vitamin A everywhere. You do not need any of it. Reduce your exposure in foods, supplements, cosmetics, especially cosmetics, and medications like Retin-A or Accutane. We can fix Accutane problems and Retin-A problems. It takes a while, but we can fix them. You want to decrease foods that slow down your liver's detox pathways, especially those that are specific to vitamin A. Many of these foods are falsely thought to be healthy, and people feel better when they're off these foods that they were sold on as health foods. We want to increase the specific nutrients that carry the vitamin A out of your body. So people can be trying to reduce their intake and try and get their liver to run faster, but if they don't actually get the vitamin A out, it sticks around in their liver. How do you think this vitamin A toxicity problem got so bad? You have to know how to get it out of your body, or else it just circulates around and comes back and recycles. All of these aspects are covered in the Vitamin A Toxicity and Detoxification Network. There's the Detox program there. The network includes membership to the Detox program, and this is at nutrition-restored.mn.co. If you want more information, you want to hear more from me about vitamin A toxicity or any other subjects, my website, nutritionrestored.com. Other video sites I use, there's Nutrition Restored channel here on YouTube, on BitChute. You can look it up here. It's also the Nutrition Restored channel there. Facebook, I'm on Facebook as Dr. As Teacher. That's my username. And again, the Vitamin A Detox and Toxicity and Detoxification Network, the home of the vitamin A, aldehydes, and glyphosate detox program. That is at nutrition-restored.mn.co. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation today. Like I said, I'm going to be coming up with a much longer presentation, taking apart every angle of vitamin A toxicity in the future. That'll be fun. Hope you guys join me for that. And I'm Dr. Garrett Smith, the Nutrition Detective. See you next time. Bye.